What is up, harvesters? Welcome back to the returning viewers, and if you're brand new here, welcome to Hobby Harvest. My name is Ken. So today I want to talk to you guys about how we are going to manipulate where the deer move in the woods. And to do that, first we're going to have to understand two simple things, or we're going to have to create those things, and that is where are they feeding and where are they bedding? Because once we know those two things, we know the general area that they are moving through the woods at a very specific time of day. And then we're going to talk about a couple other things of how we're going to sweeten up and make sure they move exactly right underneath us once we've established all the rest of this stuff. So let's first talk about the food source. So once we either have identified what their food source is or once we've created it, the rest of their movement that day is going to be based off of that food source. So what you want to do in this situation is just drive around about an hour before dark. Just see which fields the deer are feeding in. And if you guys have been hunting in the area that you've been hunting in for some time, you probably know by now where those deer are moving at that time of day, what food source they're relating to, be it an egg field, be it just some like natural cuttings in the woods. If you're in like the big woods, maybe there's some regenerative growth in a certain area that they're headed to. Could be a corn pile if you can bait where you're at. Just knowing where that food source is that they're headed to is going to make the rest of this so much easier to do. Now, if you want to put in a food plot, you can. Food plots are a lot of work to put in, but they are definitely worth it as well, because once you put in a food plot and you really get it working correctly for you, it is going to be that number one food source that they will relate to above all others in the woods, and you will definitely be guaranteed to know which food source they're heading to right before dark. So just be conscious though of agricultural fields. If a farmer planted, say, corn this year, it doesn't mean he's planting corn next year. He's going to talk to his soil guy and he's going to tell him what he needs to do to get his soil right. He may do something like a winter wheat to get that nitrogen back in his soil. And in that case, that wheat is getting harvested midsummer. The geese are going to come in. They're going to eat up every bit of grain in that entire field well before we get into hunting season. So you really do want to make sure that if you are basing this off of an egg field, that you do know what that farmer is going to be planting in there. And of course, you'll know that by about midsummer when you can see whatever's popping up in there. But don't by any means try to set up the rest of what I'm going to talk about in this video off of an egg field that you have no idea what the farmer is going to plant in there this year. So once we have established what that food source is, again, food plots are going to be at the top of that, but egg fields can work, other cuttings in the woods, even acorns, although acorns are very unpredictable how many you're going to get year to year. But once we've established what this food source is, where these deer are heading to, we need to find their bedding area. Now, their bedding area is going to relate to this food source, and if you guys want help finding where these bedding areas are or where these buck bedding areas are, I do have a video on how to find where that is in a very simplistic way, and I'll link that at the end of this video so you guys can go check that out after this. But the other thing you can do, especially this time of year, being that we are now in the second week of March, it's a great time to get out there and create bedding areas. So if you are on private property in an area where you can get in there and do some cutting, you can get some of that high canopy down, create some side cover. So that is when you are standing down on the ground, or even get down on your knees, because keep in mind the deer are a lot shorter than we are. Get down on your knees and kind of look off into the woods. Have you dropped enough trees and brush and just create enough mayhem in the woods that the deer now cannot see off far into the woods, because they now know that they're safe and secure in there, because everything off in the woods can't see them either. A deer is just like any prey animal. So how a pheasant will sit in like high thick grass where they can take cover, a deer wants to do the same thing too. They would rather be in cover that keeps them hidden than to actually be like sitting on top of a hill out in the open where they can see everything in every direction heading toward them. So you really do want to give them that cover instead. They don't like to be the sentinel up on the hill. They like to be the grouse hiding down in the thick cover instead. So just give them that. That will be that layered bedding. You want that bedding to relate to that food source. So those does and fawns are going to, of course, bed adjacent to that food source, right on top of it if they can. I'll show you guys a drone shot of the deer bedding down. This is the does and fawns here that are bedded down right off the edge of the food plot. Now, those intermediate age bucks and those older bucks are going to be further off into the woods, into that next layer of bedding. Deer don't all bed together. Their family groups bed together. So make sure you have pocketed bedding throughout your property that's adjacent to these food sources, so that they each can kind of take their own bedroom on your property. And of course, those mature bucks, they're going to be in the deepest, darkest back hole in your property that they can find, that nobody's been to in months. So like, I like to do all of this type of habitat improvement stuff at this time of year, like in spring, heading into summer, before those bucks get hard horned at the beginning of September, because once they're hard horned, they're going to start relating to those thick, deep, dark areas of your property, and you do not want to go there after that because you want to keep those almost sacred on your property so those bucks stay bedded down in there and they stay relating to your food sources until the hunting season starts and you can get a shot on them. Now, once we have established where these bedding areas are and where these food sources are, what we want to do is figure out where exactly they're moving between them because that's where we're going to want to hunt them. It's okay to sit on a food source, but I prefer not to for a few reasons. Number one, you have a great chance of blowing out that food source by putting all of that extra scent on the food source by hunting it. And also, it's going to take a lot of those deer a lot more time to get to that food source before dark because they're bedded further away, especially those mature bucks. So why not get a little closer to them and cut them off on their way to that food source instead of waiting for them to get all the way to the food source? And how are we going to do this? Because like I said, there's pocketed bedding all over your property. How are you going to make sure that they walk right in front of you and not on the trail that's 200 yards that way or the one that's 100 yards behind you or whatever? And so how we're going to do that is by creating a man-made deer trail. And I was actually on a property last year, and these people had this situation where they had a big open field off this way, a big open field off this way, and they've had about 100 yards or more of cover in the middle. And the deer, of course, are using that cover to avoid being out in the open on those big fields. But they were coming through on all of these different trails throughout this 100+ yard area, which made it really difficult to hunt them there because you could, of course, set up right in the middle of it. And if it's gun season, you would, of course, hopefully have a sight line to anywhere in there and have a shot on them. But if it's bow season, it makes it a lot more tricky, and you don't want to set up in the middle because you're guaranteeing that whichever way the wind is blowing, it is going to blow into a chunk of this cover that deer could potentially be moving through. And of course, what's going to happen, a doe and her fawns are going to walk right through your scent. She's going to blow out the entire woods, and where's that buck going to be? He's going to hear that and not want to come anywhere near there either. So you want to make sure that if you are hunting what is like a pinch point like this, that you're sitting on the edges of one of the fields where your wind is dumping out into that open field. But now what happens when you're bow hunting, you're sitting on this side and those deer are crossing way 100 yards over here through that cover away from you and you don't have a shot on them. Well, what you need to do is create a man-made deer trail through the middle, make it the easiest path for them to travel. Deer are creatures of efficiency. They work hard for those calories that they try to gather all day long. They don't want to burn them up trying to jump over things or crawl under things or push themselves through thick cover. So make a man-made deer trail through an area, but make sure it winds and weaves. You don't want this to be a big straight open like shooting lane. I hate shooting lanes. Don't put shooting lanes on your property. Deer do not like being in big straight open areas. They will avoid them at all costs. So you want to make sure that these bend and weave in the general direction you're trying to get them to move. And so how you do this is if you are in a thick area of the woods, you can simply just go out there and snap branches off. That's something me, my dad, my grandpa have been doing for generations, of just every time we walk through the woods, we snap the branch off just so it doesn't whack the guy in the face who's walking behind you. And then after a while, we figured out the deer start using those trails too, because it's the path of least resistance through the woods. But now if you're in a little bit more of an open area, what you need to do is make it more difficult for them to move on the other areas off to the sides of that man-made deer trail. So what you're going to do here is what they had in this situation is they had a lot of high mature canopy trees. The sun was getting in and creating a lot of undercover, so it was still nice and thick. The deer were using that area to travel through pretty consistently. But what's going to happen is if you continue to allow all those mature canopy trees to grow, they're going to choke out all that undergrowth. So it's a good idea to get them down, get that high canopy down, and then use them to create like this big pile of pickup sticks, these big like dams that the deer aren't going to want to move through, to force the deer to move through that very center pinch point. And then we're going to get to stand location later, but you're going to want to drop these in a way that also gives you a good access in and out to hunt this pinch point, that the deer aren't going to bump into you on that your ingress and egress while they're traveling through the man-made deer trail. And then, of course, once you do get this man-made deer trail set up and you have an idea of about where you're going to want to hunt it, where this pinch point is, I love sticking a mock scrape in there. You can put a water hole in there, just something to sweeten up that very middle of that pinch point to make sure they're moving through that very specific spot. It also keeps them distracted while they come through there. So they're going to come through there. They're going to want to rub their glands in their face on that mock scrape, which is going to keep them distracted from looking at you up in the tree while you're trying to hunt them. So it's just an extra way to not only attract them to that specific spot, so going to get them to stop there as well for a shot, so you're not taking a moving shot, and you're also going to distract them, that they have something else they're worried about instead of the fat guy up in the tree that's trying to shoot them. So once you get this all set up, obviously mock scrapes are one of my favorite places to set up trail cams. So this is when you're going to want to get those cams out in the woods. I would definitely put it on that pinch point, but I would also set up a few cams coming in and out of that pinch point as well, just so you get a really good idea of how the deer are using this area of your woods. And once you have had them out there for maybe a month or so, you can start to weed out the cameras a little bit. You don't need that many out there for that long, but just until you get a good idea of exactly where they are coming in from, when they're going out, and at what time of the day they are using this pinch point, that's going to really help you. If you guys are curious what cameras I use to bring you guys B-roll here on the channel, I'll leave them linked down in the description so you guys can go check those out. Now lastly, once we have this all set up, you're going to want to get those stands in there. Now, I, for the longest time, was always told you have one stand location for one area in the woods. I have not believed that for a while now. I will put in 2 stand locations for one attraction so that I can hunt that attraction depending on what the wind is doing. So there may be a situation where you're sitting on this side and the wind is just blowing right into that attraction. Well, then why not sit on this side of the attraction and let your wind carry off away from the attraction? If you put 2 stands within, say, 50 yards of each other, you're not going to have 2 guys sitting in them unless you're like trying to shoot video for a hunting show or something. But you're going to have an option A or an option B for that same attraction depending on what your wind is doing in your area. So in the situation I was talking about, this is where I would set those stands up. It gives you a good way in or out of here in a way that the deer are not going to bump into you. You're not going to see them. They're not going to see you. This is just a perfect setup for a stand location for these guys on this property. Just kind of use this general form here to apply to something on your property. Every property is different. It's difficult to really like do a one size fits all, but something like this is an excellent place to start to make sure we're putting these deer right in front of you. If you have the bedding on one side, you have the food on the other, and this is the easiest way to travel from point A to point B between them. This is where they're going to go. This is where you're going to have a shot on them. And I hope you guys have a ton of luck this season. If you enjoy this video, YouTube thinks you're going to enjoy this one. Otherwise, go check out this one if you want to figure out how to find buck bedding areas and the other bedding areas as well. And I'll catch you guys on the next one.